Name something that gets passed around.
A joint.
A joint.
Now, streaming live on the Marijuana Agenda.
Oh, really? What are you people? On dope?
It's time for Toker Talk Radio.
Hey, this is great, man.
The voice of the Marijuana Nation.
Marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug. That is absurd.
Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ. That's 650-534-2565.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Hey, man. Am I driving okay?
Toker Talk Radio is your chance to make your voice heard in the Marijuana Nation.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
Send that message with clarity that good people don't smoke marijuana.
Now let's get to Toking and Talking with your host, Russ Belville.
Welcome back, everybody. Yeah, this opiate epidemic thing, I didn't get to conclude with Roy Cooper, who said, quote, "What we've got to do is get people to rid themselves of this habit that they have," end quote. Well, yeah, Governor. If only there were some sort of non-toxic herbal alternative that patients routinely admit they're substituting for the use of opioids and other prescriptions. Gosh, maybe we could solve that problem. Speaking of reefer madness, ladies and gentlemen.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face-to-face with the monster of marijuana, he'd drop dead of fright.
You know, it's not easy trying to debunk 80 years of anti-marijuana propaganda in a 1-hour podcast, but let's try. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda's Reefer Madness Debunked.
All right, so if you hadn't heard in the news earlier today, Attorney General Slingblade Hobbit, JeffBo Sessions, he ordered a new memo that reverses a 2013 Obama-era policy that directed prosecutors to not assign certain crimes, certain drug-related crimes, not to track the weight or go for mandatory minimum sentences in these certain cases, unless this is a really bad hombre, to use the president's term. People that are major drug kingpins, drug traffickers using violence, cartel-linked, all that kind of stuff. The idea was these mandatory minimum sentences, which we had since the mid-'80s, have just led to this mass incarceration problem that we're all trying to deal with. We've recognized that it was dumb on crime, not tough on crime, but dumb on crime, to just throw mandatory minimum sentences at the problem, and mostly you end up getting the little fish and not the big fish. So this was working, and it had bipartisan support throughout the tail end of the Obama administration, and we were reducing the number of people prosecuted just through this simple prosecutorial directive. Well, that's gone. That's gone. JeffBo Sessions has just thrown that away and directed once again these prosecutors to go after the strictest, most harsh penalties they can get, which indeed, under federal law, if you're caught a third time, third strike with marijuana could get you some pretty serious time. That is back. It's like, Jeff Sessions is like we found a cryogenic experiment from 1986, and we just thawed it out. And we got the guy out of the tube, and he's raving about how next year's new Sony DAT player is going to blow the doors off the Sony Walkman. I mean, this guy is stuck. He is so stuck in the 1980s. He's probably got a closet full of pastel suit jackets. I mean, it's just so difficult for me to wrap my mind around. And just when you think JeffBo couldn't descend to any deeper depths of Keebler Gumphood, he goes and utters something so profoundly, ironically stupid that I had to check. Is this The Onion? Is this a satire site that's telling me that he said this? No way any self-aware human being said this. And indeed, I was proved to be wrong. It is absolutely true. Jeff Sessions, in delivering his remarks the other day, talking about combating, drug addiction and the violent crime associated with it, said, quote, "Drug trafficking is an inherently violent business. If you want to collect a drug debt, you can't and don't file a lawsuit. Don't go to court. You collect it by the barrel of a gun." End quote. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Yeah, but guess what, Attorney General Sessions? Do we see anybody shooting it out between Dos Equis and Corona in the streets of Mexico? No. Do we see Bayer and Pfizer collecting their debts at the barrel of a gun? No. Do we see Altria, Philip Morris, all the other tobacco companies engaged in, well, the tobacco companies are pretty awful, but still, they're not using violence to solve their problems. There's nothing inherently violent about drug trafficking. There is something inherently violent about drug prohibition. How many times do we have to learn this lesson in this country? We have an entire era named after it. Prohibition, the Prohibition era. We have an entire era where we learned this lesson one time before. We had to do 2 constitutional amendments just to figure this out. Only took us 13 years. The bodies started piling up in the streets of Chicago the first time, and we figured it out. Prohibition's a bad thing. Of course, those were white bodies that were piling up in the streets of Chicago, so maybe that's why we noticed. But this is just this drug war era thinking from Sessions, and my God, it's just so frustrating to me that anybody could have countenanced this, could have allowed this to happen by not doing the one thing you could have done to stop Donald Trump. I'm not going to go any farther. We'll get into a whole different rant again, and I don't want to go there. When we come back, I've got the Cannabis Miracle Boys segment that Greg DeHote was talking about that's sweeping the UK right after this.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9 House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb and licensed by the City of Portland.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact Normal at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for the Freedom Leaf Preview with Steve Bloom from Freedom Leaf Magazine. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Pod 2.0. It's not your father's Woodstock weed. It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
In hour 1, during our premiere segment of the United Kingdom Cannabis Chronicle, we spoke to the chairman of the UK Cannabis Social Club's Greg DeHote, and he spoke briefly about the impact of cannabis reform in the media in the UK and how they're a bit behind us where we're at we've got, networks and plenty of documentaries and shows that are discussing cannabis reform. But there's a segment that aired recently on a show called This Morning. I imagine it's like their Good Morning America or Today Show, something like that, a morning show that featured a young boy who is overcoming leukemia through the use of cannabis oil. It was their Sanjay Gupta weed moment. Here's the audio.
When Darren Blackwell was just 10 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia. 2 years later, he developed another, even rarer form of cancer, making the outlook for Darren and his family incredibly bleak.
Just when they were about to give up hope, something quite incredible happened. Darren and his mum, Callie, join us now alongside Dr. Chris to tell us more. And welcome, both of you. Lovely to see you. So we mentioned, first of all, that first diagnosis in 2010. You said you'll never forget because you were sitting in KFC when the call comes through. You found out that you got the leukemia, the terrible effects of chemotherapy, then you went into remission. But it was 2012, at the age of 12, that you then became one of a very, very exclusive club, one that you never want to get into. 1 in 7 billion. 5 people on the planet have Langerhans cell sarcoma. What's that?
There's not a lot of research into it, so I'm not too sure on what it is. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
So the treatment you were facing that the doctors recommended was a bone marrow transplant?
Yeah, it was extensive chemo and radiotherapy, and then bone marrow transplant.
And you didn't have just one transplant, this was 3 that you had to have, and how did you get on with that?
Well, they failed, the first 3. But yeah, it's not too trouble, so it's not a big problem to have them. So.
But then after that, as a mum, because he then really began to suffer. You have to watch him suffer. How bad was it?
Well, after the 4th transplant, they told us that, the first 3 had failed, and literally all they had was 1 more chance for him. They had 1 more bag of his own cells, no more. They stressed the thing to us that there was no more chances after this. And unfortunately, 3 days after he had his final transplant, he trapped his fingers down the side of the bed and then picked up some infections. Now, obviously, infections with no immune system whatsoever, and no way for an immune system to even start to build within his body. He was literally being kept alive by antibiotics. That's what they told us. He did get incredibly ill. Throughout his whole treatment, he'd been very happy and smiley, and he'd always tried to be quite jovial, but actually those last couple of months were very, very difficult. He was in a lot of pain.
And it started to, the necrosis started to creep in, sort of fingers and hands, losing. You were given, I think, 3 days.
3 days a week at most, is what they told me when I asked them the time scale.
But you planned your funeral, hadn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To what extent?
All of it.
What were you going to do?
It was going to be fancy dress, and I'd chosen all the costumes for people, and it was going to be quite embarrassing for some of the people to come, so...
And so, I mean, we're sort of talking about this now, but, and obviously that's fun and you wanted to keep it light and this, that and the other, but to be faced with that, to be faced with the fact that you've got 3 days to a week and being very fully aware of this and having to say goodbye to your friends and loved one, what does that feel like to face that?
It's... Once you accept it, it becomes very calming, and it becomes quite nice in the sense. It's very hard to explain.
You'd resigned yourself.
Yeah,
in fact,
I just
you were at
accepted
peace
it, and
with
it just
And because the pain was so bad.
Yeah.
You actually said you wanted to go.
Yeah, I did.
He was looking forward to it.
After 4 years of treatment, it's enough.
Enough was enough, and so this story then takes an entirely different turn. How did that happen?
Through lots of research, I'd done lots of research. Obviously, when his secondary cancer arrived and it was so unknown, I turned to the internet and started looking. And over the following months and couple of years afterwards, cannabis just kept popping up. People kept emailing me, "You need to try this. You need to." And I said, "But he hasn't got cancer. The cancers are gone. This is now a completely different issue. It won't work for him." And I would dismiss it. And it actually came to the point where I was in hospital with Darren, and he was so incredibly ill and really on a high dose of morphine that he was actually now on fentanyl, which they can't go any further than that. And it wasn't working against his hands and the other issues he had with his stomach. And I asked the doctor for Bedrocan, which is a cannabis-based pain relief that's available in Europe, because I wanted to go through the proper measures. And she actually told me, we can't, because it hasn't been licensed for children. So, and more of it came up, people just kept saying, and I thought, you know what have I got to lose?
And you've got nothing to lose at that point.
He's dying anyway, so...
They just withdrew your antibiotics. At this point, there was no other treatment. No. So you took this, and you asked him, and you said, let's try it.
I was happy to.
What did you notice? How quickly did things change?
Oh, my God. I mean, Honestly, the effect of it blew my mind. It wasn't what I expected. All I expected was done a little bit of research, and some people use cannabis to kind of alleviate their anxiety and some pain, and that's what Darren was really experiencing. And on day 70, when they said there's definitely nothing in his bone marrow, there's nothing there, you've now just got to wait, Darren got very anxious and said, well, how much longer do I have to wait? They started to try and up the morphine, introduce sleeping tablets, and so that's when I actually gave it. And within half an hour to an hour...
How was it administered?
Under the tongue, sublingually. It's just a tincture. It's not the oil that people talk about. It was just a tincture.
And what did you notice?
We noticed within half an hour to an hour that he was just chilled out. He just relaxed. The anxiety stopped. He no longer was panicking, and he was able to be compos mentis, which he wasn't able to be on the morphine.
But health-wise, I mean, actually things being tested against you, your white blood cells began to go up?
Yeah, after 5 days. Obviously, they told us nothing in his bone marrow. So gave it to him 5 days later, when the bandages came off his hand and we saw healthy fingers, which we were told there was no way they were under there. When we saw a healthy finger, so the doctors started panicking. This was now day 75 after the transplant.
And he was meant to only be there for three days.
Yeah, and nobody has ever engrafted after 50 days. So day 75, and all of a sudden his white count has appeared. The doctors start running around frantically. Doctors from Bristol Children's Hospital were called in to do some more blood tests, which I said, well, there's no point. You told me only a week ago there's nothing there. And obviously, in the blood count, it was there. It was very small, but it was there.
And to test the theory, you actually withdrew the cannabis for a little while, and the blood count started to go down again.
So where are you now? How are you now?
Perfectly healthy. My blood's all normal.
You stress this doesn't work for everybody. This is not a cure.
No,
this is something that worked for you.
And you could be prosecuted. Let's be honest.
Well, the law, under current laws in England and Wales, cannabis is not registered as having any therapeutic value. Anyone using the drug, even for medical reasons, could be charged for possession. Possession carrying a maximum sentence of 5 years in jail or an unlimited fine. Chris, how does the medical community get its head around something like this?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. From no white cells, give them cannabis and white cells start rising. You cannot argue against that. Something was happening. Now, in terms of an explanation, there are two possibilities here. One is that he went into spontaneous remission. Now, this is a situation where the cancer goes and the patient gets back to normal health. It's very rare. It's about 1 in 100,000 cases, and even that's just a guess. They don't know for sure. So, OK, that's a possibility. Now, with regards to cannabis, there's a possibility there, because cannabis has been found to have anti-tumour, anti-carcinogenic effects in laboratory experiments on animals. It's had an effect on cancer cells in the laboratory, but there have been no sort of impressive human cancer trials with cannabis.
Why aren't there trials? Look at this.
Yeah, I think that there probably are trials ongoing now that we do not know about that haven't yet been published. Because, I mean, it is fascinating. And cannabis, we now use it is licensed for use in this country in patients with MS who get muscle spasms.
Yes.
And the cannabis relieves the spasms and the pain. It also is a pain reliever in cancer patients and also reduces the nausea and vomiting in chemotherapy in cancer patients.
Well, it's a fascinating story. We're so happy that you're here and healthy. Good luck with the diner. He wants to open his own vegan American themed diner.
If anyone wants to give him an apprenticeship as a chef, then please. He's dying to become an apprentice.
Who would not want to give an apprenticeship to the boy in 7 billion?
Yeah, totally.
That's the book. That's what we've been talking. The full story, all in here, and absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Georgia.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
We interrupt this program to annoy you and make things generally irritating.
All right, I messed up the timing there on that last segment, edited with an extra minute. Don't know how that happened. Who knows? Anyway, that sound means that it's 4:20 here in the Pacific time zone. Our union mandates that we take a safety meeting, and so we're going to get right to it with the curlicue pipe. Got the curlicue pipe out of hiding. We're back in a real short minute. Stick around. I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for our Government at Work, the latest in cannabis reform at the local, state, federal, and international level. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Hello, Mr. Man. Hi. I'm working. I'm sorry. No food till this is done. It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
Welcome back, everybody. Taking a look at the live chat room over at mjagenda.com. There's a fierce political discussion going on there about our last election, Trump and Hillary, because I made my remark. I made my little cast-off remark about what's going on with Sessions now. But seriously, I take this stuff seriously. Elections have consequences. And the consequence of the last election is we now have Attorney General who's rolling back the modest reforms that we had made on ending the problem of mass incarceration. The consequence of the last election is some people that got busted, that are going to get busted over the next 4 years, are going to get incredibly draconian sentences that they wouldn't have gotten had the other person won. And let's not fool ourselves. One of two people would have won that election, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And I'm not a Hillary Clinton fan, but I can guarantee you her Attorney General would not have rolled back the Holder era protections, the Holder era reforms on criminal justice sentencing. So this isn't just some political exercise, some little thought process that we're going through. These are real lives that matter. And I know we can go the other direction and say, oh, but Hillary would have done this and Hillary would have done that. And it's like, yeah, you can do all that. We can have that other political discussion, but you cannot tell me, at least in this era, in this particular space, the world of cannabis, that we would not be better off with a Hillary Clinton at the helm than a Donald Trump at the helm. Sorry. It's just an incontrovertible fact. As far as marijuana goes, we'd be better off now if she had won. And the calls for people to vote third party, and we need to have a third party change. I've gone over this on the show before. I'm going to go over it again. This is not the Democrats doing this and the Republicans doing it. To some extent, it is. The two parties control the debate process, for example, and the way the primaries are set up sometimes can keep people out if they're third party registrants. However, in American politics, it is a two-party game. And that is not because the Republicans and Democrats made it that way. They helped reinforce it. I won't argue that. They didn't make it that way. It is the nature of our electoral math. It is the nature of the first past the post system. Please Google Duverger's law. Duverger's law. There aren't very many laws in political science, but this one holds true so much that they call it Duverger's law. And it states that in any political system that tends toward a first past the post, winner take all sort of election, then you're going to get two parties. Doesn't matter what you call them. They could be the Whigs and the Federalists. They could be the Democrats and the Republicans. They could be the Yangs and the Combs. It could, whatever, you're going to get two of them. We see it somewhat in capitalism too, when you see in most industries, there's two dominant forces, Burger King, McDonald's, Apple and Microsoft, right? That happens too, but especially in politics. And there are charts and there's plenty of, hundreds of years of electoral history to back this up. you're going to end up with a two-party system. It's just the way it goes. And so you got a choice. Am I going to pick from party A or party B, or am I not going to vote or throw my vote away? Because let's just be honest, you vote third party, it's just throwing it away. They're not going to win. The math is not there yet. They're not going to be there. And really, especially at the presidential level, I love this magical thinking that we're going to all throw our votes to Jill Stein. She's going to become president. There's going to be a green progressive resurgence. Sorry, how about you get me more than 10 green elected officials at the local level in the United States? Give me more than 10 or 20 at the local level. Build an actual party from the ground up, like the Democrats and Republicans did. Build a real party. Don't try to start by knocking down the top guy. We saw how well that worked. Jesse Ventura got to be the governor in Minnesota through all sorts of improbable sequence of events that got him there. And how much reform and how much of the independent or green party, was he a green back then? How much did that boost? How much did that make a difference? None, because you're not building a foundation. You're trying to start at the top. It reminds me of the marijuana activists in red states. They're like, we're going to do a legalization initiative. Hey, why don't you try lowest law enforcement priority at the city level first? Why don't you get some base established and then work your way to the top? No, we got the magic bullet, man. We know what's going to... Oh, it's just so frustrating. If you want to see third parties, you got to change the math. It has nothing to do with how much support. If everybody just voted for... No, any sort of political thought that starts with if everybody is doomed to failure. If all the millennials, if all the pot smokers, if we only, doomed to failure. Here's what you do. You change the math. And there's an easy way to do it. It's called range voting or instant runoff voting. There's a few different methods that can be done. State of Maine just did this. Did an initiative, passed it, that makes it so when they're voting for their elected officials, that it's a choice, right? Like you can pick from all of them. You can see you got 5 guys running. You can say, well, I like this guy as number 1, and I like this guy as number 2, and I like this guy as number 3. And I don't like 4 or 5 at all, so I'm not going to vote for them at all. Right? So you actually rank these guys. You say, oh, here's the guys I like, right? 1, 2, and 3. If I can't have 1, then I could accept 2. If I can't have 2, then I could accept 3. A voter in the last election for president, for example, could say, look, I really want Jill Stein. But if I can't have Jill Stein, all right, I'll take Gary Johnson. But if I don't get Gary Johnson, I'll bite my tongue and take Hillary Clinton because God knows I don't want Donald Trump. That's what range voting allows you to do, to actually express how you feel about the candidates rather than just picking who you think is the least awful, right? You get to rank them. And what happens is when they go to count the votes, if none of those people that are in the election collect the majority of the votes, over 50%, then they chuck out the bottom guy and they take all his votes and they assign him to the second choice of those guys, right? So like if you were the Jill Stein voter, you pick Jill Stein first, right? And she ends up at the bottom. She ends up with the fewest votes, right? Well, all the Jill Stein votes are gone. Well, who did you pick second? Well, you picked Hillary Clinton second, or you picked Gary Johnson second? All right, then your Jill Stein vote goes to Gary Johnson. Now we add up all those votes to Gary Johnson. Does anybody get 50%? No. Okay, then we kick the next lowest guy out. Gary Johnson, he got the next least. Okay, who did Gary Johnson's people pick next? Well, they picked Hillary Clinton next, or they picked Trump next, but whatever. We assign the Gary Johnson votes to one of those 2 people, and eventually what you end up with is the person the most people can accept, the most people can get their mind around, instead of what we end up with our people that throw toward third parties now, the person the least amount of people want. Donald Trump wasn't selected by a majority of the American people. The majority of the people wanted somebody other than him. So why isn't someone other than him president? With range voting, that's what happens. Someone other than the worst guy ends up being president or dog catcher or governor or senator or whatever it might be. Maine has done this. So if you're really a third party aficionado, if you really think the 2 parties suck, and believe me, I can make that argument with you as well. I'm right behind you. If you really think that's the case, then forget about aiming for the stars, aiming for the presidency. Start running local races, winning those, and start getting on an initiative. If you're in an initiative state, get on an initiative to change to range voting or instant runoff voting. Look these up. Look at rangevoting.org. There's a few other websites that'll give you all the math, all the details. This isn't the fault of the Republicans and the Democrats. It's the fault of the founding fathers. For good or for bad, they set up a winner-takes-all system rather than a parliamentary system. And really, when you get down to it, the systems are the same. We were talking to Greg DeHote from UK Cannabis Social Clubs, and he was talking about the Tories versus Labour versus the New Democrats, or the Liberal Democrats, I guess they are, in England, and how he was saying how the Conservatives have one party to vote for, the Tories. The Liberals, the Progressives, have two parties, and they're splitting their vote amongst multiple parties. What happens in a parliamentary system then is this party gets X number of seats based on how many voted. This party gets X number. This party gets X number. So yeah, if you vote for a third party, you get some representation in the parliament. Unlike in America, where it's just pretty much Democrat, Republican, and a couple of independents that caucus with the Democrats. In this parliamentary system, though, they have to make coalitions. They have to find groups that can work together to form a majority to get anything done. The same sort of thing happens in American politics. It just happens before they make it to the parliament, before they make it to the Congress. In our case, it happens when labor Democrats and minority rights Democrats and gay rights Democrats and other Democrats form coalitions within their party. That's how the coalition building happens. And so all of the building, if you want to have a real legitimate progressive third party type voice, that needs to happen inside the Democratic Party by winning primaries again at that local level. That's how, if that's the advice, if you're a green out there, if you're a true progressive liberal type, socialist Democrat, whatever you call yourself, that's the roadmap. The math dictates that it's going to be a two-party system, and inertia and power right now dictate that those two parties are Democrats and Republicans. You could try to rebuild and start from the ground floor, start from scratch and try to build your own party. And maybe in 100 and 200 years, with sincere effort, you got a new party that overtakes Democrats or Republicans when one of the two of those starts to collapse. Or you can do what the Republicans already did. It's like the roadmap's out there, man. The Tea Party. The Tea Party did it the right way. They marshaled forces. They ignored their intra-party differences between guns and abortion rights and this and that. And just concentrated on one focused agenda, primarying the hell out of any Republican deemed too moderate, not in line with the true conservative values. And it worked. It worked. The Tea Party took over their party, basically. That's the roadmap for progressive. That's the roadmap for liberals, is to take over the Democratic Party. And Bernie Sanders started that. And that's the thing that's ironic, is that he kind of did that. And the Democrats kind of let him to a large extent. I don't think they thought he would have the impact that he would have. But he started that feeling that it could be taken over from the inside. And Sanders himself is saying now, get organized and start running in these lower level elections and win lower level seats. And that's the roadmap. That's the way to get it done. I want it too. I understand the frustration of some of my listeners out there with the Democratic Party. Believe me. Oh my God. It's just, who could mess up an election so bad that you'd lose to Donald Trump? That's like, you got to go out of your way. You had to try hard to pull that off, right? That's just the most epic fail of my lifetime that I can recall. It's right up there with the Seattle Seahawks calling a pass play on the goal line in the final seconds of a Super Bowl when they've got beast mode in the backfield. It's epic fail of monumental proportions. I'm just a realist about the math. I'm a realist about the power. And we can wish and hope and dream for third parties and wish and hope and dream that somebody progressive could get in there. And the longer we keep wishing, hoping, and dreaming is the longer the Democratic Party keeps drifting to the right. Right? Let's get real about what the things are that can actually work. Get real about the tactics and strategies that actually change things. And stop with the magical thinking. All right, I know I went off on a rant that has to do with not very much with weed. So when we come back, we'll talk about weed. I got reactions to Jeff Sessions' call for more tougher sentencing and a piece on Kevin Sabet that appeared in the Daily Beast. Oh, we'll cry some crocodile tears for poor little Kevin.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
It's time for cannabis facts about Alzheimer's from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A new Florida study in the journal Molecular and Cellular Neuroscience found that cannabis promotes the growth of healthy new brain tissue. It can slow the effects of Alzheimer's and may in fact be able to halt it entirely. A long-term study by Ohio State University's Professor Gary Wenk concludes that people who regularly use marijuana get Alzheimer's at a much lower rate than others. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
The marijuana agenda, like the gay agenda, only with better music.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for the Marijuana Policy Insider with Marijuana Policy Project. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Jag heter David, p.k.a. Dirtball. Vi ska röka hela tiden, alla år.
It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
All right, welcome back. And getting back to the subject of mass incarceration and the war on marijuana, we've got some reactions to Attorney General Sessions' call this morning for greater punishments when it comes to drug crimes. That's right. The Attorney General is calling for a return to pre-2013 sentencing guidelines that will lead to harsher criminal penalties and more use of mandatory minimum sentencing when people are charged. Even sometimes low-level people are charged in these crimes, and it's just a terrible setup here that we're having to deal with. Radley Balco out at the Washington Post, one of my favorite writers out there on the issue of police and mass incarceration, has collected a bunch of the opinions of various people reacting to Jefferson Beauregard Sessions and his call for stricter enforcement. This is a quote from the Washington Post. This was their story about the announcement. They said, Attorney General Jeff Sessions overturned the sweeping criminal charging policy of former Attorney General Eric Holder and directed his federal prosecutors Thursday to charge defendants with the most serious provable crimes carrying the most severe penalties. In a speech Friday, Sessions said the move was meant to ensure that prosecutors would be, quote, unhandcuffed and not micromanaged from Washington, end quote, as they work to bring the most significant cases possible. Quote, we are returning to the enforcement of the laws as passed by Congress, plain and simple, Sessions said. If you're a drug trafficker, we will not look the other way. We will not be willfully blind to your misconduct, end quote. The Holder memo, issued in August 2013, instructed his prosecutors to avoid charging certain defendants with drug offenses that would trigger long mandatory minimum sentences. Defendants who met a set of criteria, such as not belonging to a large-scale drug trafficking organization, gang, or cartel, qualified for lesser charges and, in turn, less prison time under Holder's policy. So that was from the Washington Post describing Jeff Sessions' call for greater punishment. And of course, he had his famous quote, "Drug trafficking is an inherently dangerous and violent business. If you want to collect a drug debt, you can't file a lawsuit in court. You collect it with the barrel of a gun," end quote. Which, of course, Radley Balco noted was a good reason to decriminalize drugs. Exactly. One of the dumbest things you've ever heard one of these guys say. But there's many different reports out here, many different reactions. Here are some of them. Former U.S. Attorney Brett Tolman for Law Enforcement Leaders to Reduce Crime and Incarceration said, quote, "To maintain law and order, we need effective policing and prosecution. The Justice Department's shift to prosecuting and incarcerating more offenders, including low-level and drug offenders, is an ineffective way to protect public safety," end quote. Inamai Chatiar of the Brennan Center said, quote, "The Trump administration is returning to archaic and deeply flawed policies. Sessions is leaving no room for prosecutors to use their judgment and determine what criminal charges best fit the crime. That approach is what led to this mess of mass incarceration. It exploded the prison population, didn't help public safety, and cost taxpayers billions in enforcement and incarceration costs," end quote. And we have Families Against Mandatory Minimums, which wrote, "We know how this story ends. At the beginning, we are told that mandatory minimums will be reserved for the worst of the worst, cartel leaders and kingpins and violent gang leaders. But then we will watch prosecutors demand and get mandatory life sentences for people like Evans Ray and 15-year sentences for first-time offenders suffering from addiction like Mandy Martinson. Even under the Obama administration's Smart on Crime initiative, federal prosecutors secured a 10-year mandatory sentence for Robin Hamilton, a young mother of two whose case was called, quote, the poster child, end quote, for mandatory minimum sentencing reform." The director of the ACLU's Campaign for Smart Justice, Udi Ofer, said, quote, "With overall crime rates at historic lows, it is clear that this type of one-dimensional criminal justice system that directs prosecutors to give unnecessarily long and unfairly harsh sentences to people whose behavior does not call for it did not work. It failed for 40 years. And from the halls of state legislatures to the ballot box, the American people have said with a clear voice that they want common sense reforms to sentencing policy and not a return to the draconian policies that have already cost us too much," end quote. And then for me, the best statement on this came from the Attorney General himself, the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, who came up with the 2013 Smart on Crime policy, who said, quote, "The policy announced today is not tough on crime. It is dumb on crime. It is an ideologically motivated, cookie-cutter approach that has only been proven to generate unfairly long sentences that are often applied indiscriminately and do little to achieve long-term public safety. Abandoning this evidence-based progress and turning back the clock to discredited, emotionally motivated, ideological policy also threatens the financial stability of the federal criminal justice system." Absolutely right. And let's get some royalties out there for Rick Steves. Rick Steves, the travel writer and normal board member who is a financial contributor to at least 3 states' legalizations that have passed so far. Rick Steves has long been advocating for what he calls smart on crime policies. And this is, I'm really excited that Attorney General Holder said it's not tough on crime, it's dumb on crime. Because that's the kind of framing and blunt talk we need to start hearing from people opposed to these policies. It's dumb on crime. It's a framing that's been used by Rick Steves for over 10 years now that I can think of. He always talks about how Europeans aren't tough on crime, they're smart on crime. And this dumb on crime frame is the perfect way to attack this return to 80s drug era policies. That it's just dumb. It's a dumb move. It feels good. To some people, it feels good to think, oh, we're going to get tough. We're going to lock people up. We've done it. It didn't work. It caused more problems than it solved. Unless, of course, you have stock in a private prison corporation or one of those corporations that makes the meals for the prisoners, or one of the ones that does the laundry for the prisoners, or one of the number of corporations that benefit from the prison labor that is put in there. And oftentimes when we get the low-level offenders in there, rather than the big violent drug kingpins, they'll actually work all day. They'll do a pretty good, decent job. They're fairly intelligent and cooperative folks. If we were only concentrating on the rapists and the murderers and the violent psychopaths and the high-level kingpins, why, we wouldn't be able to get them to sew panties for Victoria's Secret and book travel on Greyhound and such. We'd have a whole bunch of psychopaths and a bunch of mayhem, and that's not good for the corporate slave labor. That's what this is really all about here. As Sessions is pursuing these tough-on-crime policies, it's all about warehousing people, continuing to keep that criminal justice, imprisonment, probation, all those industries that are entwined in that. That is their solution for jobs. That's the job solution. You lock up half the poor people in the cities, and then you hire half the poor people in the country to guard them. And one of the extra benefits you get out of this, most of the people you lock up in the cities are going to tend to be more progressive voters, more Democratic voters, minorities and such. And then you move their bodies out of that district, right? So the population in that district goes down as far as apportionment and all that stuff goes in this liberal Democratic district. And you take those bodies out and you put them out there in the country, because that's the only place you can build a prison is, right? Not in my backyard. Got to be out in the country somewhere, which tends to be a more rural location. So these rural locations, you can then inflate the population of your rural county as far as apportionment goes and all the money that you get from the state and the federal government, so to speak. And you provide a source of jobs for the people in those rural counties who will then support tough-on-crime proposals. And because the people you moved help your appropriations but don't get to vote because they're in prison, why, you can continue to have that very conservative district gaining more money, more appropriations, and continuing to send legislators into the state houses that continue to gerrymander their districts so they can ensure that this whole system keeps going. And the more you learn about this, the more you realize that this is entrenched. This goes way, way back, not just to 1937 and Harry J. Anslinger and the Marijuana Tax Act. This goes back to like colonial times. This goes back to 1600s and the triangle trade in slavery and rum and sugar. And Deborah Small does such a great talk on this, on how America was founded on the business of addiction for profit. And I say it's even bigger than that. Slavery was founded on that. Slavery was all about providing the labor for addiction for profit. But the entire idea of American capitalism so far that I can tell is based on this constant need for growth and this constant need to churn out more growth and less for labor. And the more they can continue to have underpaid labor, slave labor through our prison systems, a permanent underclass that are prevented from getting better jobs through the little box that says whether or not they're a criminal, from being able to get the student aid they could use to better themselves and raise themselves up in the society. This permanent underclass that the drug war and the war on marijuana maintains in America is part of the design. We got rid of slavery, and that pissed them off. And so, they had to have Jim Crow and sharecropping as a way to keep a permanent underclass. And then we started changing laws, and we had the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act that started to change that. And so, coincidentally, right there, as the late 60s are winding down and minorities are beginning to get more power in this country, next thing you know, boom, there's Nixon kicking in the war on drugs, which, as Ehrlichman's quote in Harper's Magazine showed, was all about infiltrating and keeping leftist politics and the minority power movements down. There's no coincidence that the war on drugs ramped up at the same time the civil rights movement ramped up. These are all part of maintaining the status quo, maintaining this machinery of American capitalism that maintains the most of the benefits of this country, moving up to the upper 1%. They're still pissed off that from the 1930s to the 1980s, we managed to build a middle class. We managed to educate more people. We managed to expand and create the American dream. That pissed them off. They're still trying to recover from that. Since Ronald Reagan in 1980, they've been a full-scale assault on the New Deal and the American middle class, and the war on drugs is part and parcel of that.
You're listening to The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association and the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the pharmaceutical agenda, without all the side effects, overdose deaths, insurance.
Side effects may include nausea, dry mouth, and constipation. Dry mouth, constipation, indigestion, and abdominal pain, which can occur without warning and may cause death.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for the Northwest Cannabis Chronicle from the Marijuana Business Association. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
I have a package here for Radical Rick. Is there a Radical Rick here? How about a Rick Russ? Any Rick Russ? Somebody named Freddie Barack has sent him a package. Anybody? What is that? Sounds like a skunk. It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
All right, welcome back. As we close up shop today in our final segment, we take a look at a piece written in the Daily Beast by the former editor of The Cannabist out there in Colorado, Ricardo Baca, who has moved on now to the Daily Beast. And the piece is entitled Legal Weed's Number One Enemy. Subtitle, Kevin Sabet, who's fighting to slow the momentum of cannabis legalization movement, says he will battle to the bitter end. All right, so the opening of this, I always give Kevin Sabet credit because he's really good at framing. He's really good at trying to sell his frame to the American people. Most of them aren't buying it, but the way in which he tries to do it, he's always cognizant of how he's framing himself and his movement, right? He's really quick to dismiss that they're all about reefer madness or that they're funded by Big Pharma. He's quick to get out of that. He says in the opening of this, quote, our competition has done a lot better in the billionaire department than we have, but I'm working on it, end quote. And, quote, it's still a struggle. The industry is still very organized, and they're pushing this very hard, so we obviously aren't under any illusions that it's easy. We don't have a billionaire like George Soros or Peter Lewis's endowment, and we've never taken a penny from Sheldon Adelson. It's still amazing to me that we've been able to raise the money we have, end quote. All right, so the whole idea of the framing there for Sabet is to paint himself as I'm just a poor little crusader trying to fight a good fight. I'm the underdog. I'm the underdog in this battle against the big bad marijuana industry and all their money, those darn billionaires with their money, and we don't have any money to fight back, and we're just a poor scrappy little underdogs. That's his whole game here, folks, and I'm going to pop a pin into that balloon right now. Because while Project Sam and its endowments or its donations may be this tiny little nonprofit, it's fighting alongside the biggest behemoth in drug policy debate, the United States federal government. Not to mention lots of state governments and lots of local county anti-drug staffs and so forth that have billions, plural, of dollars in this drug war, and they have the power of the state, the power of that gravitas, that authority they have to push an anti-drug message in a way that we can't even begin to cope with. Like saying that you're the little guy and you're a little guy fighting a tough fight when you're standing next to, the big guy. It doesn't sell, Kevin. It's not working. You are on the side of 80 years of prohibition. You're on the side of the status quo. You are like Darth Vader complaining that the Empire is up against such a fierce rebel resistance. Jiminy Christmas. Talk about trying to flip the script, man. The fact that we've got 3 billionaires is the only thing that's gotten us this far in these past 20 years. We were lucky to get this far for the past. But you got to ask yourself, why is it that our billionaires want to give us a whole bunch of money to fight legalization, and your billionaires only until recently have kicked in any? Sheldon Adelson kicked in about $4 or $5 billion in the last campaign cycle. Julie Shower kicked in another couple million or so. Why are they so reticent? Why are they sitting on their hands? Why are they not opening up their checkbooks for you, Kevin? Well, it's simple. Because the money people know a losing battle when they see one. They know a losing cause. They know a money pit when they see one. And Kevin, you are nothing but a money pit at this point. We're about up to 9 states that will have legal marijuana now, if this Vermont governor does the sensible thing. We've got over 29 that have medical marijuana at some point. You got 60% of the American people that support tax and regulate. You got over 90% that support medical marijuana. But he goes on in this piece to say, well, I'm in it for the long haul. Let me get to the point where he says, even if we lose every state, Vermont, Rhode Island, and all others, Sam will remain and stay strong as a counterbalance to the industry. I'd rather win and be done with it. What I'm saying, we lose, we get stronger, and I've always liked that personally. He's trying to paint this as, he's got a quote in there somewhere about, it took 80 years before we finally cracked down on the tobacco industry after all. So it just may take some time before people get smart about marijuana and realize that we need to go back to punishing adults who grow a non-toxic houseplant for their own personal, medical, or recreational use. Somehow he thinks that we're going to come back around to that. And Sabet is the kind of guy that actually thinks that prohibition of alcohol would be a good idea. He's ready to admit that it's not going to happen. And he'll give you all the excuses. Oh, well, it's just culturally accepted for thousands of years. Has nothing to do with, hey, we prohibited that once and we realized it didn't work, right? No, it's because thousands of years of culture. Apparently there's a cultural time limit that you have to reach. And I don't know what the number is, because we've had over 400 years of industrial hemp. We've had over 170 years of medical marijuana. We've had over 100 years of adult use in popular culture. So I don't know. Apparently you need to get to 1,000. I think if you have 1,000 years of culture, then Kevin Sabet thinks it's okay. But no, he actually would think, if you gave him the choice to say, if we had it all over to do again, we could go back in a time machine and start 10,000 years ago. Should alcohol be prohibited in society? He'd say yes. He is against adults using substances unless the learned doctor class deems that it's okay. We can't trust human beings to be able to manage their own bodies. And it's the same sort of puritanical mindset that leads men.
Name something that gets passed around.
Oh, that's interesting.
A joint. A joint.
Now, streaming live.
I don't know why that happened. This is all sorts of weird things happen when I don't do my math correctly. Anyway, the pieces out there at the Daily Beast. That's all the time we got for today. Time flies when you legalize. Join us next week for more episodes of the Marijuana Agenda. We'll be on all 5 days next week. And I'm checking my calendar to make sure that's true. But Yep, all 5 days. No, I'll be gone Friday. I'm flying to Anchorage, Alaska on Friday. 4 days next week, Monday through
Follow
Thursday.
MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers, and have a great weekend.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.